Ever since I was a kid, I always wanted to get into the things my older sisters were playing. Yep, I was the annoying youngest child, and I desired nothing more than to irritate the hell out of my sisters by always poking my nose in their business, aka their hobbies. Surprisingly, that's how I got into a lot of the things I'm into today. Anime, comics, makeup, being a bit unhinged, and yes, video games. So in 2008, 8 years after it had come out, my mom bought us a PS2. I had grown used to watching my sisters play on their DSIs and Game Boy Advances and occasionally taking them while they were asleep, but this was the first console that I could safely play without getting chewed out. Now, I don't really remember the PS2 games I had when I was a kid other than Mortal Kombat Armageddon and Namco Museum, but I do remember that when my mom bought Sonic Mega Collection, I was immediately obsessed with the game. Through the many games on Sonic Mega Collection that I played often, like Sonic 1, 2, Sonic Spinball, even Sonic 3D Blast, there was one in particular that I liked playing but could never beat as a kid, Sonic 3 and Sonic & Knuckles. At this point in time though, I didn't know the games were supposed to be a combined experience. Weirdly enough, I don't know what happened to our PS2 as one day it disappeared with no explanation, but for my 7th birthday, my mom gifted me a burgundy DSi XL that I still have and love. It was how I played so many games like Super Princess Peach, Sonic Rush, New Super Mario Bros, and Sonic Classic Collection. This was how I got back into classic Sonic. Now that I was a little older, I was able to beat Sonic 3 and Sonic & Knuckles, but I still didn't piece together that the games were only complete together. It was only when I was 14 that I figured this out, and spent years looking for a legal way to play the game, but unfortunately I didn't find jack shit, so I stopped my pursuit. It wasn't until I was 17 that I had the urge to play it again, and while in the middle of class, I pulled up my DS and booted up Sonic Classic Collection. Now as a kid, I didn't bother looking at the titles of the games, but now I was looking intently. I stumbled upon Knuckles in Sonic 3, and it immediately clicked to me. My dumbass had spent years trying to play Sonic 3 and Knuckles legally when I had owned it since I was 7 because I didn't bother looking at the title screens. Granted, the game lineup was Sonic 1, Sonic 2, Sonic 3, Sonic and Knuckles, Knuckles and Sonic 2, and Knuckles and Sonic 3, but it was embarrassing. Still, I had a way to play it now, and when I tell you I was so determined to reach Doomsday Zone that I did what I had never done in classic Sonic games and got all the Chaos Emeralds. Ever since that day, Sonic 3 became my favorite classic Sonic game and is in my top 2 favorite Sonic games. And I'll give you a hint, it's not number 2. Hey, it's Cat Lover, and for those of you who sat through all that, I'm so sorry. Sonic 3 and Knuckles is one of the most important Sonic games, especially the era in which it was released. It offered amazing music, lore, one of my favorite characters in the franchise, and top-notch gameplay and design. It was a force to be reckoned with, and still is. It's not flawless by any means, but it still holds a special place in my heart. From when I was a child to when I became an adolescent to when I turned into a teenager and grew into an adult-ish, my love never wavered. The game itself has had to cross many hurdles and milestones, but that doesn't stop it from being the best classic Sonic title. It shouldn't be hard to tell that I love the zones in Sonic 3 and Knuckles, and though each of them aren't perfect, they all have their quirks and charm. I'll also be referring to the story in these levels as well as evaluating and describing them, so let's go! Start out the game, we see Sonic and Tails riding into a new, unfamiliar place full of greenery and life, Sonic going super and gliding across the ocean to get to the island much quicker. Almost as soon as he steps onto the island, he is smacked in the face by a mean-looking Greta Echidna, and as the emeralds fall to the ground, your new enemy swiftly steals them and makes his getaway. Already this game has much more story than its 2 predecessors, which makes sense considering how ambitious this title wanted to be. Making your way through what is the first act of Angel Island, you're greeted with level designs not seen in a Sonic title before. The act is big, colorful, and has many things you can play with. For example, you can find a big ring in the first 10 seconds of the act, and you'll have to look for a breakable wall and spin dash right through it, or the fact that the level is relatively safe, with nary a bottomless pit in sight. This act is to give players new NCs into comfortable with the implications of exploration and gameplay, and put them in a good environment to explore in and get lay of the land. As you make it to the end of the first half of the act, one of Eggman's robots comes and sets the beautiful island on fire in mere seconds, merely because Sonic was there. After surviving this encounter, you'll move deeper into Angel Island as the greenery of the forest are now burning in flames, the sky orange, and the grass charred and burnt. It makes for a very beautiful and impactful moment, as we can see what Eggman could do with just a few of his new creations. It also makes you think of what he's capable of, and how seriously he takes Sonic even just arriving at Angel Island. What a warm welcome, am I right? As we make our way through this new Angel Island, players can smash open new item boxes and play around with the abilities of the shields you got. With the environment still new and not as hostile as it'll be later, this is the perfect opportunity to play around with the shields. As we get to the end of the second act, we see that there's a mini-boss, another difference between this game and the first 2. Though the boss is pathetically easy, you can find some use out of it, as the boss has a slow flame attack that doesn't do damage while you have the fire shield. After the boss, a signpost falls out of the sky, and if you're curious enough, you'll find that if you hit the bottom of the signpost, it moves out of the sky and can fall in certain places that gives you an item. Another interesting fun way to encourage curiosity, and the end to an objectively great first act of the game. In Act 2, there's actually more emphasis put on exploration, as you can find more big rings in this level and play around with shields. This act introduces water, and how water will affect the shields you're able to have. For example, after obtaining an electric shield, once you fall into a body of water, the lightning shield will burst with light and disappear. Same with the fire shield, as it'll fizzle out. With the water shield, your shield can work underwater and prevent you from drowning, which will become important considering how many zones in the first half of the game will have water. Though Act 2 doesn't do much different from the first act, it also puts more emphasis on story, as when you near an open field, a jet almost faster than you starts dropping bombs on you. After successfully avoiding them or at least not dying, you run through trees towering over you and Eggman looming dangerously in the back. Following the direction he goes in, a boss fight will start behind a waterfall, where Eggman will burn down one of the platforms, making for a more tense boss fight. This is kind of ineffective, as the boss fight isn't very hard and is even easier with a fire shield, as his attacks are fire-based, but it is still a decent first real boss fight. After defeating him and freeing the animals he held captive, Sonic stands on the last standing platform, only for Knuckles to appear on a hill sitting above it and use the switch to destroy the platform and drop Sonic where the water behind him seems to be falling. We quite literally drop into Hydro City Zone, and I don't care if you disagree with how I pronounce it. The player falls into a huge body of water and a gorgeously blue and lonely, ancient-looking civilization taken over by Eggman's robots, and here we understand why understanding shields is important. Hydro City is mostly water, and since Sonic can't swim, getting through water as quickly as possible is important if you don't have a bubble shield yet, which you won't for at least a little bit. Even with the decreased speed in the water, the first act and how it utilizes water doesn't feel too intimidating like Labyrinth Zone or non-existent like an aquatic ruin. The water and how unavoidable it is seems scary, but the game gives you ample time to breathe and even grab a shield as you traverse through the act. As you're sucked through tubes and shot through the sky with geysers, you'll reach the act's mini-boss, which again is fairly easy but maybe a bit more intimidating than the last one that requires some real-time jumps. Right after the signpost falls and hits the ground, Sonic is sucked downwards and into the second act. The second act of Hydro City starts off strong, as when you traverse a bit further, you're locked out at the beginning and a giant wall starts closing in on you. It'll take quick reflexes to avoid getting crushed, but this is exactly what the act needed to get you on your A game. The rest of the level is much tamer, but it's absolutely beautiful, with striking yellows and purples permeating the level. There are slides and loops for you to go fast in, and you can even run on water. The whole level is fast-paced, and despite some waiting around, the level is very Sonic. It's definitely one of the levels people think about when discussing Sonic 3 and Knuckles, and there's no wonder why. The water sections never overstay their welcome, everything moves as quickly as you expect it to be, and it's genuinely a fun stage to go through. Again, the boss isn't hard to beat, but I do like how the player has to use a blast from the burrito-looking bombs to propel themselves up to hit Eggman. It's a lot of fun. Well, unless you're Super Sonic. After the boss fight, a geyser shoots you up into our next zone. Marble Garden isn't a very popular zone in the Sonic 3 portion of the game, but I still really enjoy it. It is a bit gimmicky, but it's hard to control spinning tops and running up and around walls, but in my opinion, it's not that bad. Act 1 is where the player can find a lot, and I mean a lot of big rings. This isn't something you notice until you explore more of the act, which not a lot of people do as they think it's a chore and not worth the time. The first act is nothing special, with lots of greens and browns covering the entire zone, but it's definitely a good act for you to gain the super form if you haven't already. Then you can use it to beat this pitiful boss. It's just a drilling robot you'll see a few times, but all it is a rendition of the boss from Sonic 2's Mystic Cave. Even then, it's not bad, and it makes you let your guard down for the next act's boss. Act 2 really is no different from Act 1, except for the introduction of shifting grounds and platforms. I honestly don't have a whole lot to say about this act, as it's almost the exact same as the first, with more gimmicks including blue spinny platform switches and grapples, but again, not that unique. I can see why people think of this level as boring, but trust, we'll get to boring and almost unbearable in a bit. The only thing I can say about the second act in Marble Garden is that the boss is unique, repetitive, but takes some skill depending on who you're playing as. If you're playing as Tails to make the game easier, you'll really hate yourself when you get to this boss. I personally think it's a great contrast to how easy the game has been thus far, and it really pushes you to play well. If you manage to survive, the sky will become darker and Tails will fly you down to what will be the next, probably second most infamous zone in the game. Carnival Night is easily the most controversial zone in the Sonic 3 half of Sonic 3 and Knuckles. Don't be fooled by its colorful balloons and vibrant level design. It's a bit like watching paint dry. But I have to say that Act 1 of the zone is a lot of fun, with balloons that pop and propel you on impacting unique enemies. There's not much to say about it other than it's pretty easy to get through and introduces wacky, unexpected gimmicks, including barrels, which we'll definitely get to in Act 2. Other than that, it's quite simple. Its boss is easy enough to beat the brakes off of. As you're put in a room with a robot with a sharp spinning top that'll detach from its body, it'll be your duty to tap the robot afterwards and let the spinning top hit it. Pretty easy, but you have to do it before the platform beneath you is gone, as the spinning top will take them out as it hits the ground. That's the only thing about this boss that's interesting, but not enough to make it a good boss, just half decent. Before you blink, the level is done, the boss is defeated, and you land safely on the ground, ready to head to the next act. In Act 2, the most infamous half, or should I say 80% of the zone, considering it'll take you a lot longer to get through this act, many things become apparent. Water sections are back, Knuckles is back to f*** everything up, and the barrels are back. Better than ever. Yay! Seriously though, who thought this would be a good idea to put into the game? You know those spinning barrels we saw in the first act? Well, in one particular area of the game, you have to use the barrel to reach a platform way above you. Except you can't get to the platform through normal means, and players will spend a lot of unnecessary time trying to jump on the barrel to create momentum when in reality all you have to do was press up and down. It wasn't an ungodly hard thing to comprehend as many people said, but I can still understand the frustration of trudging through the act and being smacked in the face with something that hasn't appeared before. It wasn't explained at all. It really is just unnecessary, much like everything in this act. Unlike in Act 1, Act 2 pads out a lot of its time by adding water sections, odd level design, moments where it's very possible to be moving fast because you know it's a Sonic game, and be killed by something you can't react to in time like a vertically moving barrel. Now, when we get to one of the levels in the Sonic and Knuckles half, you'll understand that my general annoyance at this act isn't nearly as venomous as my hatred for that particular level. But back to the script. Act 2 ends with a boss that's not hard, but not exactly easy peasy like the last one, but again, it does just feel like waiting around unless you turn super. The boss will drop a black ball near you, and use electricity to attract it and you, potentially zapping you. It's pretty simple, but can feel like the waiting game. After defeating the boss, you will jump into a cannon, where it'll shoot you out into the next zone. If you're playing as Sonic, your first scene in Ice Cap will be you sliding and riding your way through the snowy terrain of a mountain, slipping down hills and overall looking really cool. As you crash into a wall, you'll fall to the ground and are covered in a sheet of snow, and this is where the level truly begins. Now, just to preface, I love how Ice Cap looks. It's easily one of the most beautiful stages, and the gorgeous hues of blue is quite a sight to behold. The first act is easy enough, introducing movable platforms that you can ride on and break through iced walls with, springy platforms that shoot you up, and some pretty cool and harmless enemies. The level feels ethereal, with just enough content to feel well content with. There are certain points on the level where you have to stop and think, but for the most part it's pretty simple and you can move at your own pace, thank God. Again, the boss is insanely easy, with it just surrounding itself in ice and occasionally making it rain down on you. After that, you're ready for the second act. Act 2 is a lot like Act 1, so there's not very much to say about it, but one key difference is the level design. In my experience, I feel like this act is much more fast-paced than the first one, and gives you more incentive to explore around considering that there are multiple places for you to go, that being ground level and underground. Now, there is water in the level like nearly all Sonic 3 levels, but it's not a big deal at all, and if you think outside the box, you can even get a ton of big rings in this act. Overall, the level is fast, fun, and encourages exploration much more than the first act. It shows off even more beautiful level design, down to the very background of the underground sections of the level, with how all the purples and blues mix together and shine like jewels. It's a good change of pace and is probably what people needed after Marble Garden and Carnival Night back to back. Of course, again, the boss is nothing special, with it just being Eggman trying to freeze you, but the entire zone was pretty good. After the second act's boss, you can go through a tunnel and into one of my favorite levels in Sonic 3. After jumping through a patch of snow, you end up at Launch Base. Quite frankly, Launch Base was pretty hard for me to play when I first got to it as a kid, but after so much needed practice, it's actually a breeze. Launch Base is the last level of the Sonic 3 half, and it definitely feels like it when you first get to it. The first act introduces you to a barrage of different gimmicks, enemies, and pathways for you to travel through. It can be hazardous if you're not looking ahead, and I like that many enemies make you test your knowledge of Sonic's abilities, more specifically the Insta-Shield. Many enemies are either covered in spikes or have abilities that can hit you unexpectedly, and using your resources is very important. Diving headfirst into the level can lead to some frustration like it did for me, but it's a very good level that acts kind of as a skill check. Also, I know I've said this about every zone, but the music for Launch Base kicks ass. It really sets up the scenery and feeling of Sonic 3, that way past cool feeling that reminds me of older Sonic cartoons. The level pushes you this way and that, and it can feel a bit disorienting at first, but I actually really like the change of pace compared to the previous levels. Of course, like always, the boss is pitifully easy, but I can give props to this one for taking longer than necessary due to how it reacts to your jumping. Afterwards, you're thrown right into Act 2. Act 2 of Launch Base has a lot going on in it. It introduces more of the same from Act 1, but also adds many obstacles and pathways not previously available. Spinning platforms and long slopes are in abundance, but surprisingly the level is somewhat uneventful. Act 2 is a more mild, calm version of Act 1, especially considering how it adds cutscenes that actually add to the story. After an easy but unique boss fight with Eggman, we're able to take his egg pod for ourselves and use it to traverse across the launch base as it's powering up and other platforms are falling apart. As you try to get past, Knuckles knocks you back before falling due to collapsing. Riding a bit further, you hop onto the egg pod and a fight with Eggman ensues. This fight isn't anything special as you can cheese it, but in a way it's more eventful than a lot of the bosses you'll see in this game. As we're talking about Sonic 3 and Knuckles, I won't be going over the Big Arms boss, but just know I personally think it's the best boss in the Sonic 3 half and has some badass music too. After beating Eggman, the platform falls into what will be the first zone of the Sonic and Knuckles portion, the last half of the game. Well, this is going to be a tangent. Mushroom Hill is by far the most nostalgic level for me in this game. The music, scenery, sound effects, colors, enemies, just everything captivates me and makes me feel like I'm 5 years old again. No one could possibly know how much I love this stage. Anyway, Mushroom Hill is a bit of a unique level. It's a bit of an odd halfway point for the combined experience, but also a good standalone first level for the halved experience. In the beginning of Mushroom Hill, you can spy on Knuckles cautiously coming from a hidden pathway beneath you. If you go where he came from, you'll find a big ring. Nothing special, but it's shining different colors. So when you touch it, instead of transporting to another Blue Sphere stage immediately, you're zapped into a special room we'll travel to later on. This room holds the Master Emerald, the very thing Knuckles is trying to protect, and other discolored, slightly smaller emeralds around it. Once you hop on one of these emeralds, you'll be transported to newer, harder Blue Sphere stages, all for the sole purpose of getting the 7 Super Emeralds and achieving a new Super form. As a reminder, attempting to get all Super Emeralds will lock you out of going Super until you get them all, but Mushroom Hill is filled to the brim with big rings. Also, as a warning to others, if you're trying to choose a Blue Sphere stage to pick from, do not step over the transporting button in the middle of the emeralds. It will transport you back to whatever big ring you jumped into, except it won't respond to big ring and you'll be left feeling kinda dumb. Like me, because I've accidentally done this multiple times. Anyway, enough rambling. Mushroom Hill Act 1 is gorgeous in every single way. The green terrain, vast trees, and the rest of the environment are so bouncy and inviting. It's unlike anything players will have seen up until this point, so playing around with the level's gimmicks is some good fun. It may seem like the first act isn't too eventful, but I've always enjoyed the fast loop-de-loops and unique enemies. The first act's boss isn't hard at all, but for some reason it's the most memorable boss to me. I don't know why. After defeating the mini-boss, you run into Knuckles again, and he stands behind a wall where you can't get to him. Coward. And of course he does something to impede your progress. He presses a switch that blows air in your direction, hurling you higher up and into a different area of the zone. As you come falling down, you realize the stage looks a little different, the stage quickly going from a summer green to an autumn orange. It's insanely pretty stuff, and adds charm to an already beautiful level. Act 2 is just as fun as Act 1, except there are more things to interact with, such as pulleys and looping bars. Sorry, I totally don't know what to call them. Anyway, the level introduces other things as well, including significant color changes to the stage. When I was younger, I didn't realize the stage was having the life and energy sucked out of it. Instead, I just thought the seasons were changing. After finding and destroying the machine causing damage to Mushroom Hill, Eggman appears from underground and speeds through the forest. This boss, like others, isn't too special, but I gave it props for the player actually having to move and think to avoid being hit. After defeating the boss, a giant plane is seen piloting the skies, and after seeing Eggman head up there in his egg pod, you jump onto the plane and hang on tight. You appear in the first act of Flying Battery, a zone beloved by most Sonic fans. I'm a sucker for purple, so this zone is super pretty to me. From the start of the level, the player gets to experience platforming above certain depth and avoiding hazards the level has to offer. The music is fast-paced just like most of the zone, and even the slower parts don't feel too bad or out of place. Sonic & Knuckles is infamous for its annoying gimmicks, but I quite like the ones in Flying Battery. The poles you can loop and jump off of, springs located on capsules, and even the movable spikes. It may seem completely unpredictable, and it definitely is, but I still think that's what adds charm when playing this level for the first time. Maybe it won't be interesting the second time, but it's still a treat regardless. In the level are some less than stellar bosses. The mini-boss for the first act is an example of let the boss kill itself that you'll see a few more times in Sonic & Knuckles. In this boss, the opponent is a capsule, and standing on the pad on top of it will cause it to hit itself. The only thing you'll need to look out for are the sides of the capsule you'll need to be on to avoid getting hit, but even those have visual cues. Not a great end to the level, but we'll move on. The second act, like a lot of second acts, isn't very different from the first. The only difference is that the level itself is shorter than the first, but also has alternate pathways you can take. It's really interesting and fun to go in different directions and experience a level a little differently after the first playthrough, but all in all, the greatness doesn't last long. The level isn't a drag, but seems a lot less focused on speed and more focused on maneuvering around obstacles in the first act. Not exactly a bad thing until you get to a room where you're trapped between two lasers and a weapon above you that occasionally shoots a giant beam at you. The beam is pathetically easy to dodge, and all you have to do is simply move left or right out of its way. Too bad the beam ends up destroying the flying battery and you're let free, or else the boss would have done his job and killed the player, out of boredom. The platform you're standing on after hitting a checkpoint starts rising, causing all other parts of the level to become dangerous to be left around. You must race to the top of the level and avoid being crushed by the rising platform, and after succeeding, the platform raises you into the sky where Eggman suddenly comes hurtling down. He hangs below the platform you're on, gripping it with spiked hands, and swings around it, leaving him vulnerable to attacks. After the first few swings, he will inch closer to you, forcing you to jump over him while he tries to burn you with a flame. After a bit of back and forth, he continues swinging, and this is your chance to kill him pretty easily. Not the best boss, but after that run with the beam, I can't complain. After beating him, you drop from the stage and somehow don't die as you dive headfirst into the next and most hated zone of Sonic and Knuckles. As you fall out of the plane and into desert sand, you bounce back up like you didn't just jump thousands of feet to potential doom. The level looks tiring, humid, and like an ordeal, because it is. Getting a little too ahead of myself, as Act 1 isn't that bad, and it's really Act 2 people, including me, hate so much. Even so, there are still many gimmicks in Act 1 that slows gameplay down to a screeching halt, and though it's not as egregiously used as in Act 2, it's still quite noticeable from the rest of the game. You'll have to wait for platforms to move, scale walls small hops at a time, and occasionally move around in quicksand. It makes for awkward moments in the game, as you won't be going fast so often, and when you feel comfortable to, you get hit by annoying enemies you may or may not even be able to react to. Even so, Act 1, in my opinion, is just alright despite me tearing it apart. I would like having to be conscious of what's to come next if the previous levels weren't so jarringly different and if the obstacles were annoying as hell. Even the boss is unlike others. Dropping down into a platform, a pyramid starts rising out of the ground, which again screeches gameplay to a halt, and a golem appears from one of its doors. While other bosses can immediately take damage, you can't directly hurt this one, only push it or lead it towards the quicksand behind you. It's just as boring as you think. But after beating this pathetic excuse for a boss, you're rewarded with entry into the pyramid. And this is where things start to get really interesting. This act is absolutely torturous. It's like the majority of the levels from Sonic 1 came in to say hi. If you thought the first act was slow, this one drags its feet. This level puts a lot of emphasis on timed sections, and these things are mandatory to continue through the rest of the act. For example, when you fall into a specific part of the level, you will hit a capsule that sets a bunch of ghosts free, and this is unavoidable. Now you have to worry about the lights in the level turning off, as the ghosts get more aggressive and start attacking you when the lights shut off completely. Pulling light switches that you'll see throughout the level is the only way to prevent this. As well as doing this, there are sections of the level that you have to push switches at a snail's pace and race to get past a closing door. Miss it and you'll have to backtrack and start all over. There are also these sections with rising sand that'll crush you into the ceiling if you don't act fast enough, so not only is it tedious and annoying, but can easily kill you if you don't know what to do. I cannot stress how insanely mazy this level is, and the only reason why I can navigate it semi-comfortably is because I've played it a million times. Having Super or Hyper Sonic here in this zone is a godsend, and just really helps the level go by a lot faster. Even though I just finished shitting on this act, I actually really like the interior of the tomb. I especially like the shades and colors of the levels as the lights dim, and the design of the ghost is very cute. Scary, but cute. The Act's boss isn't bad either, and considering that there's actual action here and not just waiting around, I liked it even though it was quick. After beating the boss, you take a tumble into the abyss, and as you fall, you'll soon find yourself in the next zone. A lot of Sonic levels love to transition you falling into the next zone, and this is no exception. This act is some good fun after the torturous Sandopolis, and while it's not as fun as the Sonic 3 levels, it's still several steps up. Lava Reef Zone Act 1 is full of warm colors, from scorching reds to warmer beiges. There are many hazards in this level, such as walls that shoot flames, lava falls, and even enemies disguised as the environment. Rocky grounds and walls can be broken through, opening up more paths to the level. The level itself is pretty nice to look at, and even nicer to traverse through, but alas, there's not much to discuss. The boss is, again, more eventful than others, where even when certain targets disappear, a different one appears. After defeating the mini-boss, the level darkens as you run through a long corridor and into the next act. So this act got a makeover, and a pretty good one I'd say. The warm reds, oranges, and beiges turned into cooler hues of blue and white, signifying a clear change but just as much danger within the beautiful crystal cavern. The terrain is more or less the same as the first acts, except there aren't as many enemies, unless I'm tripping. The level makes for a nice break, with some platforming and precision challenges to put you in the zone. The act is filled to the brim with things that can very easily kill you if you don't pay attention though, such as being crushed by moving platforms, losing all your rings due to flames, or even the many spikes you'll see in odd places. As you near the end of the level, you'll get to a staircase that seems to go on and on and on, until you meet your favorite red bully at the top of the staircase with a cartoonishly sized boulder. You get knocked down, tumbling down the many stairs you just climbed, and even down into the pits of the cavern. When you fall down, you see the death egg behind you ignite and cause the gorgeous crystal cavern we love to melt and be set ablaze. This is very tense, and I love how the background is used as a story device to further help the player understand what's at stake, and how much danger the island is in just from the death egg beginning to power up. Missiles are shot at you from the background, and you must move fast enough to dodge them and jump off of one burning collapsing platform to another. It's tense, and there's even precision platforming above certain death with some very brief side-scrolling. If you stay nimble, you'll be lowered into the level on top of a platform that you'll use to face the boss. This boss is quite infamous, as Eggman appears in front of you, unable to be damaged through normal means. He causes the level to angle and sway to one side and shoot down harmful projectiles to hurt you. You'd think that with the precise jumping and need to avoid falling into the lava and spiked projectiles, it'd be more fun. But it's not, because it drags, and that's about all you have to do because guess what? Eggman's own projectiles hurt him. Wow, what a surprise. But even so, at least the beginning is some good tense fun. After releasing the critters, the lava around you cools and hardens, and you make your way into the next zone. You recognize where you are, as it looks and sounds just like Act 2 of Lava Reef Zone, but for some reason it looks different somehow. Special. Instead of rocky terrains and crystals, the zone has steady platforms made of strong and bright material, looking ancient but as tough as ever. It's more of a level simply for exposition, but it's kind of invigorating to get here. You're only here for a brief moment, warping to another location within the zone when you run into a room with an ancient mural and see Knuckles. Now, there's no wall contraption separating you two, no tricks up his sleeve, nothing. The fight is about as pathetic as you would expect, but honestly it's not so bad considering that Knuckles isn't meant to be a bad guy. It's a unique fight though, as we haven't had to fight anything other than Eggman's creations. After beating his ass into next week, we hear a disruptive noise coming from the next room, and after following Knuckles there, we see what he was working so hard to protect. Now, if you got all the Super Emeralds, you'll see them glowing and surrounding the Master Emerald as it's being stolen by none other than Eggman, the guy who had Knuckles hoodwinked all along. Knuckles does try to stop him, and you can try to hit him too, but after electrocuting the poor Echidna, he leaves with the Master Emerald. The floor comes crashing down, with Knuckles exhausted and beaten, but he extends a trusting hand to you, gesturing you to follow him into the next room. It's clear he needs your help, so you warp with him into a new and unfamiliar zone. This act is short, sweet, and absolutely beautiful. Knuckles takes you to Sky Sanctuary, a place well above the clouds and the rest of Angel Island just as the Death Egg is taking off. At this point, you also see robots being deployed off the ship that totally won't be littered throughout the level. After opening up a path for you, it's clear that your new red ally is out of commission and he leaves the rest to you. The level itself is very fun, and while it's only one act, it's also good for storytelling. The level puts the angel in Angel Island, as it's so angelic and pretty that it almost feels strange to be there. The falling platforms and vines wrapped around the map only work to prove the age of the place, and I quite like the colors used here. Bright yellows, whites, and green definitely help the zone feel more ancient and important. The zone has many warping paths that take you higher and higher as you race to catch up to Eggman's Death Egg before it completely takes off to the sky, and while there's nothing but egg bro rolls to worry about, you run into an unfamiliar familiar face. Metal Sonic, or should I say Mecha Sonic, is back, but with a changed appearance, some upgrades, and a real vendetta against you. The fights against him are actually rehashed and iconic bosses from previous Sonic titles, such as the swinging disco ball. After defeating him for the last time, you jump off the now collapsing Sky Sanctuary, leaving your new enemy to perish as you race your way up a pillar with stairs falling almost as quickly as you can run. At the last second, you jump onto the launching Death Egg, and begin your treacherous venture through Eggman's twisted mind. Running through Death Egg, something is very clear. This won't be a cakewalk. Just from looking at the place, how brain devoid of life it is, and how sharp everything is, it's obvious that this isn't your typical final level. It's not bright or as funky as Metropolis or even Scrap Brain. Even the enemies, who are from being somewhat cute and still resembling animals, look completely creepy and dangerous, as all of them are faster to attack and completely unpredictable. Act 1 of Death Egg introduces you to a lot of gimmicks and environmental hazards, including floors that move over electrical currents, that change course when you jump, running up and across solid holograms, and more. This is only the tip of the iceberg, as even the boss isn't nearly as easy as the previous snooze fests. In the middle of a room you'll come across, you'll be faced with a giant robot with a red eye you're supposed to hit, and with every hit you land on it, the more it'll shoot tiny spikes at you when the moving balls near its bottom explodes. Once all of its balls are gone, it'll detach itself from the rest of the contraption and float in the air with spiked platforms surrounding it. Once you hit it, it'll shoot a laser out of its bottom as the spiked platforms spin uncontrollably, making it harder to land easy hits on it. The boss is annoying, sure, but I can give her credit for not boring me to death and making one of the few bosses in the game somewhat fun to play against. After a victory pose, you'll fall into the ground and be sent all the way up towards the top of the death egg. I'm sure seeing Earth beneath you is crazy as hell, but now you get to experience it firsthand. The background is very pretty, seeing as you're in space, but also impending and terrifying, considering you need to save the planet you're looking down at. This act is probably even more stressful than the last, as now you have to deal with zero gravity moments on top of everything else you were just dealing with, and that's including more bullets you'll need to dodge on moving platforms upside down. Yeah, it's getting crazy, but I love this act because of it. It feels good to dodge projectiles and attacks, and complete the act faster each time I play. Despite how hard the level can get, how many times you'll be zapped, shot at, and possibly fall into a rare bottomless pit, it absolutely rules to play. You'll actually feel like a hero in your own story, being as cool as you want to be. Sounds kinda cringy, but I love Sonic because it allows you to be as cool as you want with enough skill. Anyway, as you whip into another section of the level, you arrive at the most annoying boss in the game. It's a bit hard to describe, but this boss requires you to play with gravity and have the otherwise indestructible enemy's spiked bombs hit him. It's pretty time consuming, but in my opinion the next boss more than makes up for it. After destroying this boss, a path opens up that we chase Eggman through. How we don't catch him immediately is a question I've been asking myself for ages, but we're too late. He hops into a giant mech. This is a Death Egg robot, different from the one in Sonic 2. This one is a lot more intimidating and daunting than the last one due to the sheer size of the thing. Let it be known that the big arms track plays during this fight, making it even more tense than it needed to be for 8-year-old me. It really does feel like the end of the world if you fail, with the giant mech trying to crush you between his massive fingers. After this phase, the mech will move to the left side of the screen and begin stomping towards you as the ground begins to fall apart. He will also occasionally shoot flames from his nose, but that's not the scariest part. In order to properly damage him, you'll need to hit his chest open to expose his weak spot. Opening it will cause the Master Emerald behind it to send out a giant blast of energy that needs to be dodged with a well-timed jump, but you'll also need to worry about hitting him too. It can be scary, and due to the game not giving you your rings back if you die, you might be killed from an ill-timed jump. There's a lot you need to do. It is not explicitly explained how to defeat him, so you might be tempted to experiment and figure it out for yourself. Even when the Death Egg robot comes crashing down, there's another phase that involves you chasing a now fleeing Eggman and his iconic egg pod as he tries to make up with the Master Emerald as his base falls apart around you too. This phase is short and sweet, as all you have to do is chase and hit him, but even then you'll have to worry about keeping up as the ground behind you continues to collapse. After defeating him, the base is completely destroyed, the Master Emerald is dropped in front of you, and the game is over. Your journey is complete, and that's all, if you don't have all the Chaos and/or Super Emeralds. For all the hard workers who got all the Chaos or even Super Emeralds, this true final boss fight is for you. You turn super or hyper and fly your way through space, dodging meteoroids and chasing Eggman. You don't see him for a bit, so the first section of the fight is collecting as many rings as you can, as you won't be able to grab any during the first phase of the fight. Trust me, when I first unlocked this boss, I worked so hard to beat the first phase, which is a cakewalk for me now, only to die as soon as the robot went down due to a lack of rings. This fight really does it for me. The music, environment, and obstacles screams determination and bravery, but also fear. It's a true culmination of everything you've been through so far, how hard you worked, and what you've learned. The first phase of the fight isn't hard, but can be a bit tricky as it involves you having to guide missiles into the mech's face as those very missiles follow your every move, not to mention the little projectiles flying towards you too. Maneuvering the missiles is surprisingly really fun, but it might take some time to understand what needs to be done. After this phase, another egg robo zooms past you and all you have to do is keep ramming into it while dodging more meteoroids and picking up rings if needed. It's simple but exciting, and when the robot goes down, you zoom in to grab the Master Emerald. Finally, it's safe, and as you float through the sky, Tails comes to grab you and deliver the Master Emerald back to Angel Island in his guardian Knuckles. He even gives you a cute little smile as you fly away in the distance. All is well, you fly with your buddy away from the island, and your adventure has come to a close. Sonic 3 and Knuckles is, in my opinion, one of the best Sonic games, and in my top 3 for the best 2D Sonic games. The game is an amazing experience that's crucial for every Sonic fan, and it really did symbolize just how Sonic was peaking at the time the game was released. We're coming up on a peak at the moment, but it's important for fans to know just how big Sonic 3 and Knuckles was. It's a lot more unique than the previous titles, with a more comprehensive story despite no talking or text boxes. The game represents how good things can be just by focusing on what makes the game fun, no matter how simplistic it might seem today. Each level is much more different than the last, doesn't overstay its welcome, and gives you new things to do that don't feel out of place most of the time. The special stages are great, the Blue Sphere stages are stellar, and the overall experience is mostly superb. Mostly. Because Sonic 3 and Knuckles does have its fair share of issues. Sometimes levels feel too short, and other times levels drag their feet. I'd usually never complain about longer 2D Sonic levels, but the ones that stick around a little too long, like Act 2 of Sandopolis and Carnival Night, are almost unbearable. They both introduce gimmicks that players aren't used to, making for some frustrating moments. It's even worse that the gimmick mechanics aren't explained beforehand, and once you learn how it works, you move on to the next level never to see it again. I'm sure in the 90s when it was originally released, it was just as annoying, if not more so than it is today. Once I get to the Sonic & Knuckles half of the game, I get kinda burnt out, despite how fun it is. The game is longer than the 2 previous entries, and to me, it can take its toll on players in different ways. The game, albeit short, have levels that feel like they're there to take up the player's time. Even so, the game is a great experience with much to offer to Sonic fans and even people just into 2D titles. It's one of my favorite games of all time, and it's always been near and dear to my heart. Hey, if you made it this far, thanks so much for watching my video. Let me know your thoughts of the game in the comments, and what other games, Sonic or otherwise, I can cover in the future. I'm Cat Lover, it's been real. Peace.